The NFL stands for not for long.
Set, Sharga and Armstead. Roll out, Walker still running out. Looks to the left, wide open, Thompson touchdown. Colin Thompson with the touchdown. There was nobody within 20 yards of
What a catch off the bobble. Colin Thompson scoops it up.
Lofting corner, the end zone. It is caught for the touchdown. The first NFL touch for Colin Thompson is a score.
All right, everybody. John McMullen's on the show. I brought a prop for Johnny today.
Nice.
Look at
nice. This. Brandon Graham was playing Arizona. We'll get right into it. The Eagles were playing Arizona 1 week. I think Bruce. Yeah, Bruce was still. I think it was Arizona. And I was wearing that type of cap on the sidelines, and BG just started cracking up and saying, Bruce Arians, Bruce Arians. So ever since that day, I'm Bruce to BG.
Oh,
ever since that day. Which I feel bad for Bruce Arians.
My dad gets Bruce Arians, Wealth Advisory Services, Paul Krummenacker gets the Bruce Arians, and I bought this year when we went over to London, watched a little Tottenham Hotspur game where, of course, the vast majority of NFL games are played over there. What a cool! I become a Hotspurs fan, but I bought this over there. I'm official. Actually, on a side note, I was going to work. You wore this this is another side note, and we'll get back to it. You wore this into when we used to do radio together a bunch. So I'm like, I was grabbing some hats because I have a couple shows in a row here, and I'm like, you know what? J-Max coming on. I'm going to wear this today.
Yeah, I don't wear them as much now. Not because of BG. I don't know. I just,
it's a style. It's a look. It's a good Northeast cold weather.
I do it. I still do it in the cold weather. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I go more beanie now because I get too cold. So I got to go. I got to go full board. You got to cover the ears. Yeah.
Global warming? No, we're not doing that on this time. Here we go. John and I go a bunch on it. Different. Tony Bruno on the show? Oh, geez. Here we go. So I digress. It's funny. Brandon Graham. So I'll never forget this. I finished up the AAF, career. The league came to an end after the Carolina Hurricanes owner bought it and realized this is a shit show and stopped it essentially. So I'm got to work out the Detroit Lions, and I was really kind of out of nowhere. My agent called me and said, "Hey, we're going to try to get workouts," and called me a week later. Boom, we're going to Detroit. Let's freaking go. So I'm boarding the plane from Philly to Detroit, and guess who's sitting in first class? Brandon Graham.
Nice. Yeah.
And I just, someone was taking 4 hours to put their bag in the overhead. So I ended up standing right next to him, and I've never been shy to introduce myself. So I just tapped him on the shoulder and said, "Hey, Brandon, I played at Temple. I've been in and out of the league for the last couple of years. I'm on my way to a workout with Detroit." He's like, man, so gracious with his time. Because I was sitting there. We didn't have a choice. I'm waiting. I have 60 seconds with him. And he's like, dude, best of luck with everything. Keep grinding. You're going to make it. Keep at it. And he was just so gracious. And I've seen him since, but I've never had a chance to really go up and thank him for that. Whether that is the reason why I signed in Carolina or not, who knows? But it was a really nice gesture, and it shows what type of guy he is. And it probably calmed my nerves a little bit on the plane, allowed me to grab a nap. It was really cool.
Yeah, he is my favorite player I've ever covered. I mean, he is Mr. Energy, always in a good mood to the point you go, what the hell's going on here, BG? I mean, the guy's always brings it every day. It's unbelievable the juice he has, and it really sets the tone for the Eagles. But on a personal level, when he was going to be a free agent a number of years ago, he thought he was leaving. This was his sort of second contract expiring, I guess it was. And, he thought he was out the door. He thought the Eagles weren't going to give him what he needed to come back. And, the last day, locker clean out day after the season, he stayed and at the end of the NovaCare Complex hallway, gave every member of the media that was covering the team, either bro hug, dap, whatever, every single one of them. Just a class act. A lot of people don't like us, obviously. Just a class act, but he gets it. He understands our role. He understands everything about this industry. And remember, I think a lot of people forget, Colin, he took a lot of you-know-what in Philadelphia early. He got drafted before Earl Thomas and Jason Pierre-Paul. So early in his career, Eagles fans were brutal. Why didn't you take Earl Thomas? Why didn't you take Jason Pierre-Paul? And I think it's ironic. Earl's going to the Hall of Fame. Don't get me wrong. He's a great player. JPP was a great player as well. Had some issues with fireworks, but tremendous player. But I think it's ironic that Brandon outlasted both of them. Obviously, Earl was with Seattle, JPP with the Giants. BG's still here in Philadelphia, going. Had his, finally hit 10 sacks last year, which everybody loves in Philadelphia.
Yeah, right. That number, that round number, even though it was an extra game.
Yeah.
Legendary guy, but legendary though. And that's right. There's so many guys like him over the year that have been like the model of consistency in Philly. I'm just trying to think of a few that again, that aren't like a freaking Pro Bowl or top 10 player in the league, but like to be like really good and bottom tier Pro Bowl, like consistent for so long. But again, with that type of player, like when you talk about Brandon Graham football wise, and everybody wants defensive end sack, right? They want sack. Yeah. But I was so happy when we played them 2 years ago in Carolina and he was not healthy. Now I was upset he was hurt. Don't get me wrong. And I want to face the best, but when Brandon Graham's out of the lineup in the run game,
oh yeah,
that's a big deal. Now I still,
I can tell you, we do conference calls with opposing coaches every week, and when you have an offensive coach, it didn't matter what the national thought was. Every single one of them, and I mean every single one of them, would bring up 91-55, 91-55. Got to block those two. Fletcher Cox, Brandon Graham. Everybody game planned for years for those two guys when it came to the Eagles. And, you talk about run defense, as you mentioned, Colin, nobody pays attention to it. It's like him, Cam Jordan, guys like that, two-way defensive ends who do their job. And he's a very good pass rusher. I think he gets underrated, but I don't think I don't think he was ever a great finisher, if that makes sense. I think, there's certain guys who are great finishers. DeMarcus Ware, I thought, was always a great finisher. And it's generally those long guys who are really rangy. And BG wasn't that, but as far as an all-around defensive end, he was as good as it gets in his prime. He really was.
Yeah, he really was. It's an interesting debate here or conversation, right? There's these kind of stoic, powerful, influential figures on the offensive defensive line: Jason Kelce, Lane Johnson. Right? There's tons more, but I'm talking like Eagles, like Ring of Honor, and then you got BG. And then Fletcher.
Yep.
Is this it? You think this is the last year for him? One final push for that group? I know some guys are, a little longer in the tooth, maybe not, but some injuries. But I would guess, maybe this is the last kind of push for those four. Maybe one or two come back, but I would guess that.
Well, I think definitely Lane's coming back. I mean, Lane. By the way, I just was writing about Lane for Sports Illustrated because every year we do our top 25 Eagles heading into training camp, and we do it. It's not like you go most impactful. Obviously, it's Jalen Hurts because of the value of the position. But what we do is we kind of frame it as I call it do your job. I call it Belichick. Who does their job the best?
Him.
And Lane was number one. I mean, think about it. You as a tight end know how hard it is to block in this league. Week 11 of the 2020 season. Week 11 of the 2020 season is the last time he was credited with giving up a sack. Now, There were some injury issues in 20. He had the ankle injury. So even if you want to wipe out that because he missed some games, that's 2 full seasons in this era, which, you got DeMarcus Lawrence, Von Miller on that, Nick Bosa,
Every
Micah
team
Parsons, they
has
moved.
multiple. Brian
Yeah.
Burns, Hassan Reddick. He faced
Yeah.
Hassan, right? Like the guy forklifts people. If you watch him, I challenge fans, watch him. Just watch the game. Watch Lane. Don't watch the quarterback. Watch Lane. Watch Lane and Jordan. Watch the whole line. They're so fun to watch. They make it look so simple. And that's probably why fans don't appreciate it. And I don't blame them because most fans have not tried to forklift somebody off the ground before. But it is amazing. Watch Lane take a little step and just lock onto somebody, and they're done. And they're like the best in the world.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, like most guys are straining their ass off. Now he's straining, don't get me wrong, but he makes it look very easy.
Yeah, and you would think at this point in this era, which is so pass heavy, you'd fall into a sack.
Most guys do.
He played 18 games. 18 games late in the season and through the postseason with a torn adductor muscle in his core. He didn't give up a sack or a quarterback hit. Colin Thompson. Not one.
And it's funny,
not
like
one.
Chip Kelly drafted him. Chip Kelly drafted Zach Ertz.
Right? Well, I always say it's better to be lucky than good.
Of course.
I always say this with the Eagles. The Eagles have a very good organization.
They do.
Go back to Doug Peterson. They wanted to hire Adam Gase. And Adam Gase asked for too much. Then they moved to Ben McAdoo. They finally got to Doug Peterson. Sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. They almost hired Josh McDaniels before they hired Nick Sirianni to be the head coach. I don't think that would have worked out very well. But player-wise, go back to last year. The Eagles had a deal in place to trade for Calvin Ridley. He's a very good player, but he's not A.J. Brown. And then Calvin got suspended. Atlanta did the right thing. They said, look, we can't trade him because they knew the suspension was coming. Then they moved on. They wanted to sign Christian Kirk, and Jacksonville just gave them more money. They said, hey, good luck. We can't give you that. Then they wanted to trade for Robert Woods. For whatever reason, Robert Woods wanted to play in Nashville. Nice city. Then they wanted Allen Robinson. Allen Robinson wanted to play with the Super Bowl champions. If they would have gotten any of those players, they wouldn't have traded for A.J. Brown. Sometimes it's better to be lucky than good.
Really well said. And it's funny, I'm listening to Bussin' with the Boys with a really good episode for those listening that want to go back to them. And they have a lot of them, and they're long-winded. They're really talented. They're so good. I don't mean long-winded in a bad way, but they're long. They're a commitment. Oh man, I got to know him too. Who's the safety for the Titans? Great guy.
Kevin Byard.
Kevin Byard. Thank you, Jack, for trying.
Philly kid, by the way.
Philly kid, which is crazy. He ended up going to I think small. I forget it was South Carolina State, North Carolina. I forget who it was.
Middle Tennessee State.
That's it. Thank you, John.
You know why I know that? Because that's where Reed Blankenship is from.
There you go.
Kevin Byard to Reed Blankenship. Yeah.
The brain is not clicking the way I wanted to today, but tremendous interview. And they were talking about how when Jalen faced Tennessee, and knowing Jalen and how competitive he is, and how that's circled on the calendar. Like, some players don't care about that stuff. Some players do. Some players pull from other things and motivate them. Some players don't. I don't. I just try to focus on here. That's all. The game's hard enough for me to think about something else and not jump off sides and not whatever. I got enough to worry about. But it's funny, they said the one touchdown he scored got called back. Next play, he scores again. Like, that was his destiny. And then, of course, their GM sadly got let go after that game. What do you think of him? Where does he rank, in this sphere of wideouts in the NFL, and how impressed have you been with just his overall game toughness and leadership for the Eagles?
I knew he was good from his days in Tennessee. I didn't know how good. He's top 5, and I kind of go. I think Devontae Adams is still the best. He's right there with Justin Jefferson. I put those two guys. Tyreek Hill, Jamar Chase. I think AJ's in that conversation to be top 5. It's funny. I think he was the final piece of the offensive puzzle. Everything kind of fit in place because of his presence.
It bumped everybody down. It probably made Devontae.
Devontae, great receiver, but I don't know if he's ready to be that top tier Jefferson like number 1. AJ is, and all of a sudden you got one of the best 2 or 3 complementary receivers. Then you have Dallas Goedert. Like you said, it's the domino effect. And, guys are, God forbid, if AJ gets hurt and you got to knock people up a notch, it becomes harder. It becomes more difficult. He was sort of the final piece to that offensive puzzle. But, the most impressive thing to me about him, he can beat you. And you look at him, right, and you say, all right, he looks like ridiculous. 6'1", 226.
He's jacked.
He's really swole Batman, as Slay called him. So you think, all right, he's an X, right? He's, but he can do everything. He can play in the slot. He's not only a split end, he can play flanker. You can move him all over. He's the best slant receiver in football per PFF. And then he was the second best guy on go routes. Typically you don't have that. So he can play, he can play power forward and just use his body to keep defensive backs away. He can go deep. He can outrun people. They don't think he's as fast as he is because he's so big. And he all summer last year, Colin, he was working on those. I call it, because I got to cover Randy Moss, those late hands. If you remember Randy Moss, he would not put his hands up until the last second. And that's what AJ was working on. And you watch how many times he used that last year. It really worked out well for him. He's dominant. His Twitter handle is always open, something always open. And he is always open because he's one of those guys, even when he's not open, he's open because he can use his body and make contested catches. But yeah, he's a great player.
No doubt. And that's been the interesting part of their roster, right? Like we talked about the domino effect, and we'll be Eagles heavy today because we can. But like you said, the domino effect. What are you going to do? How are you going to get beat? Dallas is a stud. I think he's one of the 3 complete tight ends in the league when it comes to blocking and route running that can do both. And offensive coordinators can game plan around him in both, not just, hey, we got to protect him in the run game because he can't do it. No, Dallas can block. If they were in a like a West Coast offense, quote unquote, he would be handing the dirt, blocking power, blocking duo, but they don't run it a lot. You see him kind of running split zone and pulling and blocking for Jalen, and which is great. And I'll tell you what, I just like the depth of the team, and I want to get into Howie in a second. But watching Marcus, I've only seen 2 episodes of this quarterback thing so far, and John will come out in a couple weeks, but I think he's a perfect quarterback for them backup wise. Like veteran, has his shit together. He's been through crazy ups and downs as a player, top pick. He's back in Philly where everyone thought he was going to be right to begin with. That saga we're not getting into, but like, what are your thoughts on him? I think he's Marcus Mariota is probably the perfect backup for Philly, or at least one of them in the conversation.
Yeah, by the way, I love that show. I knocked it out in 2 days, and I can't even tell you. Jody and I, my partner on Birds 365, Jody McDonald, who he got into it because he can't stand Kirk Cousins. I've always thought Kirk was underrated as a player, and people give him too much. What?
Yeah,
the guy's been tremendous, but he hasn't won the big games. But everybody's like quarterback. It's quarterback versus quarterback. Like nobody else is on the field. And I'm watching this, and I don't know how deep you're into it, Colin, but this guy took a beating last year like you would not believe. Nobody knew it. Nobody knew it during the season. He was never on the injury report, never complained about it. Man, as you get further into it, you're going to see just how badly beat up. But to me, and even as a guy who's, been around the league, I'm not in the locker room like you guys. So I don't get to see, and then all the stuff at home, all the stuff he does just to get ready to play. He's got his own chiropractor on Fridays. It's amazing. It really gives you, I hope people watch it, and I hope they have a greater appreciation for Kirk afterward.
That was my main takeaway.
Yeah, man.
I'm too in. I thought early on it was very highlighty. I don't want to see and hear commentary from this person and that.
No,
person.
I agree with that. I didn't like that.
I was
but
like,
once they, yeah.
I want, and that's what everyone said too, because I talked about it on the show last week. I watched through the 2 episodes, and I'm like, I want to see more Kurt at home. I want to see Pat here. I want to see, I know they're trying to fabricate him talking to his, the team psych, which is great. Like, okay, you're bringing up the mental health. That's all part of it.
And that's part of it too. Training his brain with the neuro stuff. It's amazing. All the stuff fans don't think about. And even somebody like me who's in the locker room can't see. But and I bring up Nate Gary. If you remember Nate, I bring him up all the time because Eagles fans didn't like Nate Gary. And this was in the Jim Schwartz era. Ken Flajole was the linebackers coach. And I would talk to those guys, and they loved Nate. And he wasn't, he was an average player, wasn't a great player. And I'm like, what's the disconnect here? Why do these guys love Nate Gary so much? This is not like Malcolm Jenkins. We just talked about Brandon. He's not like that type of player. And it comes out, one of the defensive coaches ultimately told me he played the whole season with a sports hernia. And extremely painful. They didn't have anybody else. So the coaching staff developed a tremendous respect for him for playing through that and giving him what he could. And part of it was he was a really smart player. Ken, really instinctive, really just, he wasn't the most gifted. He wasn't,
I get it. I'm in that category.
If you put his football IQ and stuff into Devin White's body, you'd have a superstar. But that's sort of how it works.
That's how it works. Church McCaffrey.
Yeah, occasionally you get somebody who has it both, and they're really, really special, like Christian.
Yeah.
But the stuff that some of these guys go through, and to a certain degree, they showed it with Patrick too in the ankle. But Kirk. It was the game against Washington early in the season. It was like week 6, week 7. Darren Payne just lit him up and really banged him up. And from that point forward, he played the whole season just trying to get ready for each week. And he was playing at a high level. Even the Buffalo game, everybody remembers the Buffalo game because it was crazy. That was the Jefferson play, the play of the year. Allen fumbled at the goal line when it looked like the game was over. Just the craziest game. Guy couldn't even breathe on the sidelines. And he's making these throws that are unbelievable.
You know what I enjoyed too, though, on top of that, John, was like when him and Justin Jefferson, like they missed a throw. Could have been in episode 2. And Justin came back.
It's probably against Philly.
It was against Philly. It was the pick. And he came back and was like, hey, what do you think there? And Justin right away, my fault, my bad. I should have done this. I should have done that. Kurt's like, yep, next time do this and I'll be better here. Like that to me, like that's the number one thing in football. Like literally that I learned from Coach Rule back at Temple. It was the best thing I could have learned. My fault, my bad. And I'm going to work my ass off. I don't do it again. It sounds kind of tacky. You're listening like, oh, here we go. But you're dealing with professionals with egos and people that work their ass off. So if you just raise your hand and say, I'm effed up and I'm going to find a way to get this right, you're respected. You are well respected. Yeah. I just really thought that was cool to see Justin, who's the best receiver in the NFL, top 2, and is so gifted. And you see Kirk, who's just like, they have just that great relationship. I just saw that on the field. That is hard to do, hard to fabricate. And I was impressed by it nonetheless. I want to transition to Howie Roseman. We did a Dream Big rally that Mike Carey, legendary Central Bucks West coach, multiple bar restaurant owner in Doylestown, great friends with Mike Pettin Jr., RIP to Mike Pettin Sr., big time Doylestown guy, and an amazing thing, raising awareness and bringing kind of kids together and mental health. And it was really cool, and confidence, and how even the most successful people go through tough times. And I was very blessed to speak at it. And, Colin Gillespie, NBA champion, zoomed in and did something. And a couple other people were there, military members, and, the women's basketball player from Villanova. It was really cool. A lot of Doylestown people. Well, Howie Roseman zoomed in. He didn't have to do that.
Nice.
He really didn't. And he was at some gazebo, and he's got his kids playing somewhere, and I don't know what he's doing. But I thought that was a really nice touch, because he gets it. And then we talked about people getting it, right? It's really hard in this business to be tough and ruthless and remove the human aspect and be businesslike and not be a human, and then a dad. And then it's tough. It's really hard. And the most successful people in this business, you can be super gracious and super nice, but you have to be cutthroat and be willing to make a lot of sacrifices. And obviously that gentleman has. But just touch base on kind of Howie's career in Philly, if you could. Kind of paint that picture to people that really have no idea, because he's, this Gator. He used to come to the Gator football team and talk to us, and all of a sudden he moves up in the ranks and he's the GM. And then Chip Kelly comes in and he drafts a couple players. He's not the GM. Then he comes climbing back, and then he builds this freaking roster that them and the Niners, in my opinion, are the deepest two rosters in the NFL, Kansas City. But I've just been blown away by it. So can you kind of articulate Howie's journey to where he is now, revered as top 3 general manager in all football?
Yeah, I mean, Howie is interesting. I've gotten a chance to talk to Mike Tannenbaum, who actually probably, I don't want to say got him started, but Howie sort of when he was very young, he was sending letters to every NFL team. He knew he wanted to get involved with the football industry, and it's really difficult to do if you don't play like you, Colin, and you go a different route, which Howie did. As you mentioned, he went to Florida, he went to Fordham, I think, law school, and he was always portrayed. So Mike said, look, I got this kid who is really has a tremendous drive, tremendous work ethic. And he said, you should interview him, to Joe Banner, who was the Eagles president at the time. And Joe said, all right, I'll give the kid a look. And he started out as an intern. And then all of a sudden he was more on the legal side. It was salary cap, staff counsel. It was all that kind of stuff. And, he worked and worked and worked, and he loved personnel, and he watched tape, and he learned. And I think a lot of people, say, oh, you didn't play, you can't learn tape. But there are people who, it's not my expertise, but there are people who haven't played that, do the work to learn scouting and that kind of stuff. And he got better. And all of a sudden he's in football administration, and he's helping out. He makes his way slowly up the ladder, eventually player personnel, vice president of player personnel, all the way up to GM. It's interesting though, when he was the first, we always call it this is Howie Roseman 2.0, because he had the power struggle with Chip Kelly and lost it. And I think that was Jeffrey Lurie's greatest mistake. And when I say that, I say he trusted Howie. And the point, you know this, Colin, when a GM in this league gets fired, essentially, they don't stay in the building. No. With a raise and a new title.
They're gone.
So Jeffrey was hedging his bets with Chip Kelly, saying, all right, you think you deserve all this personnel power, I'll give it to you, but I'm going to keep Howie around. And when he wasn't involved with personnel, to Howie's credit, he sort of went around the country and the world, really, because he went to Europe as well. And he went to talk to successful sports executives. He talked to Brian Cashman of the Yankees, I know. He talked to R.C. Buford of the Spurs. He went over to whoever was running Manchester United. I forget who it was. And he just tried to use the time to pick the brain of successful executives and what made them successful. And I don't think he ever thought he was going to be the GM of the Eagles again, but I think he thought, when I get another chance somewhere else, I'll be better prepared. And ultimately, Jeffrey does the about face, buyer's chip, and puts Howie back in position. And the second version of Howie Roseman is a heck of a lot better than the first version. I think it's because he's more open-minded. I think he listens better. He's not as I don't want to say he didn't listen to scouts, but he didn't listen as much to scouts in his first incarnation. Often they'd make a recommendation and he'd go a different way. And now I think he's better with the collaborative process. And you don't get everything right. This is a guy, they drafted Jalen Reagor instead of Justin Jefferson. Everybody gets draft picks wrong, but the Eagles' batting average is pretty good. And I always say the best part, we already talked about it with A.J. Brown. The best part of Howie Roseman, he's always got a contingency, because your original plan, it's not always going to work out. So you want to hire Adam Gase, you better have a contingency. You want to trade for Calvin Ridley, you better have a contingency. The Eagles are really good with the contingencies. Other teams sort of, when their first plan goes awry, then it becomes a fire drill.
Mm-hmm.
And the Eagles are really good at just saying, all right, didn't work out, let's go to plan B, plan C, plan D.
Sean Desai, I am so happy. And again, he has to have success, and that defense will have success. But I worked with Sean in Chicago. And again, when we talked about this on your show before, Birds 365, check John out at JF McMullen on Twitter. Great show. John's my favorite Eagles guy, if you want to call it that way. We've done a bunch of radio together. John's had huge impact on my radio career, if you call it, and it's been a blast hanging with you and doing radio with you. But where'd my train of thought going? Wow, look at that. I was
Sean Desai.
John Desai, sorry. I was thinking about my next question after that. Good job, Colin. Temple Media Broadcasting. How are you? But Sean Desai, speaking of Temple graduate, when I got to Chicago, he comes up to me, Temple tough. So happy to have you here. So gracious, so smart, so intelligent. I was like, which, that's normal for a coach. But then you find out the guy's like, could be literally the professor and be this and all these different things because he's got all these degrees. And I start texting all these Temple guys, hey, Sean Desai, hey, and everyone's like, the guy's incredible. You're going to love him. So he goes from the assistant linebackers coach or whatever he was in Chicago. Obviously, he moved up with Vic. Vic left. He became the DC. Coach Nagy got fired. He took a kind of a, lame duck year, I guess you want to call it, or whatever he was. What was he in Seattle?
He was an associate head coach. So he had a big title, but
I don't think he had
he wasn't the DC or anything.
I don't think he even had a position group, and I could be wrong. Sean, I'm sorry.
No, he was associate head coach, defensive assistant. So
perfect.
Sort of Matt Patricia. That's
hey, we know you're a coordinator, but we have a coordinator. Yeah. We just want you, we'll get you a job. You're going to be gone in a year and be at DC somewhere, right? Yeah. That's just kind of how it goes. Well, he gets a job, and I spent about 15 minutes with Sean picking his brain. And this was when we played Seattle last year, and we had a huge win at Seattle and Carolina to get us back in the playoff push there because the AFC South was a mess. And he was just awesome. Like, I'm talking about Pete Carroll, asking questions about the Seahawks organization, like just deep dive. And he was just so gracious with his time. And just, Philly, you're going to love him. Philly, you're absolutely going to love him. But, what are your thoughts, John, on kind of the Eagles staff? Because I know they've turned it over. You've seen it. You've covered these teams for so long. You've seen hockey line changes on coaching staffs. You've seen coaching staffs that have been there forever. What do you think the impact is on this current roster in Philly?
It's going to be interesting because I do think, going through it with if you go back, Colin, to the 1999 Andy Reid coaching staff, it's like an all-star group.
Loaded.
Yeah. So many head
Harbaugh,
coaches. Yeah.
Harbaugh, Morningweg, Doug Peterson, player, Matt Nagy,
Leslie Frazier, Ron Rivera, on and on and on and on.
Yep.
It is unbelievable how many head coaches came from that staff. And Jim Johnson was a defensive coordinator. He didn't even want a head coaching job. Rod Dowhauer, who had been a head coach. It's just an unbelievable staff. And slowly, as he started losing coaches, losing some of these good coaches, the attrition wears on you. It's really hard to replace, top tier guys. I was talking to Ray Didinger last week. You brought up John Harbaugh. Then you go to Rory Seacrest. Nothing against Rory, but you ain't John Harbaugh. So you go from having the best special teams to taking a significant dip. And with Doug, when Doug won the Super Bowl and all of a sudden you lose Frank Reich and John DiFilippo on the offensive side, it's not the same. It becomes a little bit more difficult. I have, people joke all the time because they had a good relationship with Gannon. And I was actually closer to Steichen than Gannon. Those were good coaches, man. Those were good coaches. I don't have as much worry about the offensive side because Nick's an offensive coach. It's his offense. But the defense, it's not only like if you did a depth chart of coaches, Colin, the Eagles lost their top 3 defensive coaches. Denard Wilson was JG's number 2, so to speak. He left because he didn't get promoted. He's in Baltimore now. Nick Rollis was number 3. He went with JG to Arizona. He's the defensive coordinator out there. So they lost their top 3 defensive coaches, and they lost 5 starters on the defensive side. So that's a lot of turnover. I think I was really impressed with Sean. I think he gets Philadelphia better than Jonathan Gannon ever did. Part of that is probably because he was at Temple, so he understands the city a little bit better. And they want to hear.
Is he going to pressure?
Yeah, what they want to hear.
We're bringing up
Sean's playing big defense. I try to be honest with Eagles fans. Limit explosives, win the turnover battle. That's the goal.
Let Hassan Reddick run around.
Let Hassan Reddick rush the pad. But here's the thing, right? It's all modern sports is a math equation, unfortunately. So the whole philosophy behind Bick's defense is extra guy in coverage. It's a passing game, extra guy in coverage, one less guy in the box. Sometimes you give up a little bit when it comes to the rushing game in run support. They're going to play the same style of defense. But Sean's smart enough to say, we got to be aggressive. You got to feel us. Palpable is the word he uses. He gets Billy. So you and I have had this discussion, whether it's about fans oohing and on about 70-yard throws in a practice bubble, or
they're shocked.
Yeah. Or
that a first-round pick, an NFL quarterback, can throw the ball 70, 80 yards. I got a guy.
By the way, how often do you see him thrown at 70 yards in the actual game on Sunday?
Once every other week, once every 5 weeks.
Yeah, once. Yeah, and it's usually a Hail Mary. It's great if you're Aaron Rodgers and you can throw a Hail Mary from 70 yards away. But guess what? You don't want to be in that position. You don't want to be throwing a Hail Mary.
The only time you're going to get it is if it's a huge play action play and the guy ends up like 15 yards behind the line of scrimmage, like Mike Vick, Washington Commanders. Everyone knows that throw and can visualize it, where he's setting up like 12 yards behind the line and throws it 60.
Flicking it. Flicking it. Yeah.
He's unfreaking real, man. Every time I can, I talk to Skylar Marty Morningweg's son, who I know very well, about Mike and just like how different he was.
Ball jumped off his hands, man. That's like watching, I always say, when the first time I saw Justin Tucker kick, as goofy as it sounds, like you know NFL kickers, those guys are unbelievable.
They are unreal.
I saw Tucker, though. It was different. It was the ball coming off his foot. It's like, what is this guy doing, man?
So Randy Moss with the late hands, Tucker with the kicks as we wrap up here. You know, it's funny. I'll give you time to think about the most unique things you've seen or players that you're like, well, that guy's different, because my uncle Chuck Gormley covered the Flyers forever for, I think, the Courier Post, 25 years. And then he went to Washington, did a couple years down there. And he always said, there's a third one I forget, but he said Mike Tyson sparring before a match. He said he knocked out like 10 guys in a row. Boom, boom, boom. It was only like a 10-minute workout. And boom, guy down, 30 seconds, bring the next guy in. Boom, 10 minutes. And he said, Alexander Ovechkin have to practice hitting slap shots. He's like, that's it. I've seen everything. I've seen Lindros. He said those two. And it was one other thing. I forget what it is. Sorry, Chuck. But for you, right? You talk about Randy Moss, boom, late hands, like just unique. Obviously, that's not Randy's best quality. You guys unreal. Talk about Tucker, but is there anything, 2, 3 players over the years in any sport or anything you've seen, you're like, holy shit, this guy's different?
Tom Brady came here for joint practices once. And it's one of my favorite stories, because for those who've been at the NovaCare complex, they have 3 practice fields sort of lined up. And the far practice field to the right is where you can get really close. If you're a media member, you're basically 2-3 yards off the field. And the Patriots and Eagles were doing one-on-ones, receivers, corners, safeties, and such, defensive backs. And, Tom was rotating through. And the Eagles, when they were done their rep, were walking right by me, the defensive backs. And I've never heard so many expletives in my life, because everything Tom threw was pinpoint. Just the accuracy was unbelievable. So that's one of them. You mentioned I got to cover Randy when he was a rookie in '98, when he had that just explosive year. The Vikings should have won the suit. They finished 15-1. Should have won the Super Bowl that year. Had a bunch of injuries late in the playoffs. Gary Anderson missed the field goal, but he was just different. Michael was different. Mike Vick, as you mentioned. I always I always ask players, when I hear NFL players in awe of somebody, I know they're special. So, like Aaron Donald, Brandon Brooks, I would ask Brandon Brooks every year. Not every year, but I would go to the players, especially the veteran players, when I would fill out my all-pro ballot, say, who's the best player you played against? And I always say, can't be your own team, because everybody's going to give you their own guys. And I, asked Brandon a couple times, Aaron Donald. I said, yeah, well, I know that, but who's second? Aaron Donald. It's like, there's
and you were someone that
then
good,
you go,
especially him. Like, if I'm going to say it, I'll give you a couple guys, but for him, he was elite.
Yeah.
Like, if he got your hands on you, like, you're done.
Yeah.
He was that. He's like a Hall of Fame type player. He's shortened career, but like, if that's a guy that plays, like, he's that good, Brandon.
Yeah.
It's funny, like, to me, and it's, of course it's close, but I always say it, like, Christian McCaffrey's the best player in the NFL.
Yeah, well, you know how much I love Christian.
I saw stuff at practice. It's almost better at practice.
Yeah.
Like, I know you said not your teammate, because you see stuff at practice that you're like, what did he just do? Like, and then again, the mental side, where you're just like, his walkthroughs are insane. Should see how the guy walks through. You're like, what? This is not normal. Yeah. So that's what blew me away with Christian right away was, he does all this stuff all in the field, like at a ridiculous level, but then off the field, he's at a ridiculous level. And I don't really know if I've ever played or know many players in the NFL that are like that. Freakishly gifted and then freakish work ethic. Probably Aaron Donald.
Yeah, Aaron. AP, I should have mentioned Adrian Peterson.
AP.
Because I got to cover him. He had I'm sure you've heard the stories about his handshake.
Unreal.
Second strongest handshake I've ever had. Ironically, the first, I don't know if you remember Jim Marshall for old time fans. The wrong way run, if you remember that. But I mean, I think he played in 282 straight games as a defensive end, never missed a game. And I didn't meet the guy till he was like 60. And his hands, I almost cried, Colin, trying to pull that thing out of there.
Isn't that the best? Like, it's still the best. And you've met so many players, and it'll be a fun season, man. It always is. There's always drama. There's always excitement. I think the Hard Knocks thing will be great. And lastly, what are your thoughts on Aaron Rodgers? I find him and again, we're not talking about COVID and all that drama. I'm talking about not politics. I'm talking about Aaron as the human, like getting to see him a little bit. I know some players that play with him and loved him. I know coaches that say he's the smartest human being they've ever been around. But I think he's refreshing. Like, he gets to the podium, he speaks his mind, he shows emotion on the field. It's like, why do we compress the ones that are different? But then we applaud them, and then we bring them down so quick. Yeah. It's like Aaron's like refreshing. He's like, yeah, I'm into this drug. Well, what do you think half the league's doing?
Yeah.
I like to disappear and
he upset people with the immunized stuff. But I'm not an activist. So I always say, even though I do a lot of radio, I did it with you, I do the show every day, I still consider myself a reporter first. I always will. So I never, like, I don't, Aaron Rodgers is one of the best quarterbacks who've ever lived. I've always described it as the greatness. You got to win Super Bowls. There's got to be longevity. He's got longevity. He doesn't have the Super Bowls. But how I always say it is, I've never seen a quarterback play the position at a higher level than Aaron Rodgers when he's at his best. That's how I describe it. I don't think anybody has played it at a higher level. Now, I was talking to Clark Judge this week, who's been a Hall of Fame selector for years. And he points out, he's right, it's never been easier to play the position because they protect him so much. Those old guys, the Bradshaws, the, Staubachs, and you go to that era.
It wasn't that long ago where I remember coaching playing 6th, 7th, 8th grade. And my man would get rid of the ball, and you'd have a good 3 count, 2 count, depending on how old school the ref was, to lay on light the guy up. I mean, I lit quarterbacks up 8th and 9th grade. Like, if you did that now, I'd be behind bars.
Now back to the Peyton Manning's quarterback show. You're going to see the beatings that quarterbacks take today, and they do. They take some nasty hits. But back then, man, it was hard to play the position. And, also receivers, we're getting bumped down the field.
Thank God it's like that, though, for me. My wife's happy.
Yeah. Over the middle, guys are getting hit. And, it was a lot harder to play offense. So, I acknowledge that. I try to be fair. But as far as, I've never seen anybody play the position at a higher level than Aaron Rodgers. I think
it's a great point, John. And I think the only person that will play it better than him one day, and again, it's not a hot take, is Patrick Mahomes. I think he's the best quarterback ever to walk the earth.
He might be the most talented.
Yeah. And we'll see what happens. I mean, again, the combination of him and Travis and Andy Reid and all the characters.
I got freezing cold taked about Patrick Mahomes in the draft because I said, and I stand by this, he's a mechanical mess.
Oh, he is.
There's certain guys, like I get freezing, and fans don't get, he doesn't have great mechanics. Like I would talk to John DiFilippo, about great mechanics, he would always point to Carson Palmer. If you watch Carson Palmer play, everything's perfect. Footwork, on his shoulders, as perfect as you can get. He was sort of that guy when it came to mechanics. Patrick Mahomes is like Steph Curry in basketball. Like, you don't want to teach your kid to play like Patrick Mahomes because you can't play that way.
And it's funny, Travis.
Yeah, Travis.
Same way. Like, you go into a tight end room. I've known people that have been in those rooms in Kansas City. Like, don't watch Travis. It was the same way when Matt Nagy came to Chicago and I was in the room. And he would say, don't watch him. But I did learn a few things. Like on the crossing routes, like they're like 5 to 6 yards across the field. We call them a shallow. He went right away, flat right away.
Yeah.
So, and it would get him across the field faster, like running along the heels of the D lineman. And I was like, okay, I'm slow as shit. How do I get across the field fast? And I would win on shallow routes because of it. So I would take a couple things from him too, where a lot of people say, well, you're not the same player. Well, okay, I still can try to take something.
Yeah.
No, that's a fascinating organization. They've had a ton of success, obviously. I mean, they've won a lot. Andy's won a lot. It's a great place to play. It's like the Midwest Philly. It's very similar. It gives you a hug, and it also is tough. And it was loud when we played there in COVID.
Oh, yeah.
It was only half full. So, no, it's good stuff. John McMullen, I got to run. We get 50. I mean, John and I could go forever. We really could. And one day we will. The great John McMullen, check him out all over social media at JF McMullen. Check out his daily show in season.
Daily off season. Every day, man. Monday through Friday. First 365. They're football crazy in Philadelphia.
They are?
Yeah.
I didn't
Shocking.
know that. Yeah. The great John McMullen. Thanks, J-Mac.